Alright everyone, it's time for Vermont Issues video number 154. There's a bill right now being proposed in the legislature of my home state to make prostitution legal. And a bunch of people messaged me this link last night. It's from Breitbart, link in the description. I've got very mixed feelings on this issue. I'm a libertarian, but I'm a pragmatist. I do believe in, I don't believe in objective morality in the general sense, but I believe in what works, sort of right and wrong, what feels right and wrong. I know that that's ethnocentric and it's subjective, but, everyone has feelings unless they're a psychopath. My feelings on the issue of prostitution, therefore, are not a purist libertarian sort of feelings. Like if you look at McAfee there, he'd say, well, I think it's fine. Ha, ha, ha. People should be able to sell what they want. You should be able to sell recreational McNukes, which is, on guns, I'm more purist. I think, yes, you should be able to own machine guns and get them through the mail. I think it's a wonderful thing. You should be able to cut down trees with your Tommy gun. On prostitution, it becomes a little bit different because the inevitable exploitation that happens to be attendant to such an industry, as opposed to most industries that would be, like you'd think about, like marijuana or something. You can grow marijuana for medicinal purposes, for personal use and so forth. There's no necessity of exploitation. It can be cartel adjacent because it's been driven underground into a black market. But even then, it's not necessarily associated with anything specifically victimizing. Prostitution tends to promulgate human trafficking. There's a reason why in cities and in countries around the world where prostitution is legal, or in that gray area where it's kind of legal, why human trafficking is more prevalent. Including, like, here I am in Amsterdam. It's well known for its red light district. Right now they're literally having problems with the hookers getting harassed and abused by the tourists because too many people show up to fuck them. So don't say that legalizing it solves all problems. It's not a panacea. There's still abuse. There's still STDs to worry about. There's still human trafficking. There's the possibility that someone who's not actually of age is there behind the window. This can be a systemic problem. The problem is that the nurturing, more moral side of me says it's sad that prostitution even exists. It is the world's oldest profession, I suppose, but, it shouldn't really ultimately have to exist. It's a sad stain on humanity that it does. That being said, keeping it illegal doesn't really work either now, does it? It does do, when you drive it underground, it does mean that seedy people tend to be the ones that are pimping people out. And of course, it's not all pimps and stuff. In the state of Vermont, it's more likely that the person is independent, or it's like a call service sort of thing. There tends to be some degree of standards, and it already is kind of sort of a gray area, because Vermont's legal system, infamously, sort of overlooks certain things, like with drugs. The drug war, technically, on its surface, ended in Vermont long ago. The cops in Vermont, by and large, already weren't arresting people for having a joint. They would break your pipe in a show of force and say, basically, hide it next time, don't fucking smoke it in public. But I can remember, like, at UVM, people would have, like, smoke-ins. On 420, people would go to the green or the beach or whatever, and they would get high. They were breaking the law, the cops would cordon it off, and they would do nothing. Technically, they were all in violation of state and federal law. Nothing was done about it. Mainly because when you get 1,000 people doing it, it becomes impossible to jail them all without UVM complaining. When they're the main source of taxes other than IBM in your county, it becomes an issue. Money talks. All that tax money, federal taxpayer money, going to blaze it up. With prostitution, the other part is this. And I don't mean to be NIMBY about this. Vermont has a certain atmosphere that it promulgates for tourism purposes. This is economic on its face. My fear is that if you had a bunch of brothels getting set up, that might be harmful to that. That is, that you'd end up with sex tourism instead of maple trees. You'd end up with sex tourism instead of people looking at the clean water and the greenery and cute animals and stuff. I'm not sure that it would be a good idea. Like, our state has very visibly banned billboards. Like if you've got draconian state regulations when it comes to even putting up a business sign. Billboards are banned in the state of Vermont. It's funny because the second you cross the New York border, you see billboards everywhere. Out in the middle of nowhere, like a mile from the next town, there's just like billboard after billboard in the trees, and it's really funny to me because we don't have that in the state of Vermont. They're banned. we've gone out of our way to, we ban billboards, we ban buildings of a certain size and certain shapes. Everything is highly regulated according to pro-tourist standards, and this sort of fusion of traditionalist and postmodern, if that makes any sense. Vermont's an odd state. It's a mashup sort of culture. You're saying, though, that you have no problem with brothels moving in. Now, what about if localities want to exempt themselves from this? They say, well, we're going to keep prostitution illegal. Or at the very least, we're not going to license brothels and we're going to harass the whores, so to speak. Does this not set up a potential legal battle in the future that's going to take millions in taxpayer money to solve? Like let's say that my home county, Rutland, says we don't want brothels here. We don't want to have and by the way, it'd probably be the opposite. Rutland would probably be the tourism mecca of sex work. Knowing Rutland, the first brothel in Vermont would be in Rutland and be 3 stories of nonstop sex work. On the first, it would be like they'd call it Weekends with Sodom or something. And on the first level, you'd have like the hookers that you can only cuddle with, and then on the next level, you'd have sex. And the next one, you have fetishes, and then the top one, you got like the really severe shit, like hanging upside down in leatherettes from the ceiling or something. That's more Rutland's style. It would be very interesting, and I'm sure it'd be worth making videos about, and it would be worth a chuckle. But I just don't know about the issue. I mean, economically speaking, it brings in money, but you're getting that money from inevitably exploiting people. I understand that when you've taken it out of a black market and turned it into a free market, you can regulate it more ably. So you can do like mandatory STD screening. You have to show ID. You have to make sure that they're 18 or up and stuff like that. I mean, that helps. The problem is that you're always going to get the person who bribes the regulator who comes to make sure that all the hookers are STD free. You're always going to get the person who raises a court case because they think that they should be able to do things differently from how the regulatory process works, and the state has to litigate and the taxpayers have to fund it. It could affect tourism negatively. The idea that it's and this is being suggested by a bunch of women in the legislature in Vermont, by females. They're saying, well, it's a women's rights issue. We want these people, insofar as prostitution has to exist at all, we want people to be able to make sure to get STD screening, to be protected. They need to be able to sue if someone's raping them, and stuff like that. Understood. The problem is that by legalizing it, you may make the situation worse. But not only will you have that above-board hooking going on, but you'll also have people that provide a cheaper alternative to that and get trafficked in. That's what I'm worried about. And I'm also worried that it'll mainly not affect even just Vermonters. It'll be people from around the world getting shipped in to be like exotic animals on display for the baser inclinations of an audience that'll be 95% male, let's face it. I don't know that it's a good idea. That being said, again, the libertarian in me says, well, at the very least it shouldn't be criminal. I've got a better solution, I think. Just decriminalize it. On the hookers end and on the Johns end. Just decriminalize it. Take the laws off the books. You don't need to have brothels. You don't need to legalize it and regulate it. You simply need to make it so that people are able to seek legal recourse, number one. Recourse on health, which is already widely available in Vermont. You can get free condoms, free everything in the state of Vermont. Everything's free. It's more leftist. In that sense, I agree with the left because it has led to a higher overall reproductive health. Let's face it. STD rates in Vermont are a fraction of what they are in some states. Part of that has to do with the fact that there are no significant urban areas as well, I understand. That's already widely available. Simply decriminalize it. Make it clear that if a hooker shows up and launches a police report because she's been raped, it's not going to get laughed at and she's not going to get arrested for hooking. You don't need brothels in order to accomplish that. I mean, at some point that becomes potentially a draw for other crimes as well. Because people who are going to tend to visit a brothel, that may be indicated with other forms of crime as well. I'm not talking, they want to smoke weed, snort coke. I don't care if they snort coke. Vermont should unilaterally end all drug laws. We should decriminalize them all, go with the Portuguese model. We can do so many wonderful things if we do. It'd be wonderful compared to what the system is now. That being said, I think you could end up with other crime. And didn't Vermont ban like casinos and stuff? So you're saying that you can't gamble. That vice is not allowed because of bright lights and neon, and we don't want that because tourism. But it's okay to set up a brothel that'll be the same. A little mini red light district in the gut of Rutland. And I bet that's where it would be located. It'd be right past the post office. Right in that little nook over there that Rutlanders call the gut. there'd be 5 or 6 fucking whorehouses over there probably. Yeah. So you'd have the one for the high rollers, and then you'd have the one for people who are more discreet, and then you'd have the low rent one, which is like the STD testing only happens once a year instead of every other month or something. And I think it would bring problems into the state. Again, I'm trying to reconcile my libertarian beliefs, which in some cases are quite purist, with this. The problem is that prostitution almost inevitably violates the NAP because of the trafficking issue. I mean, again, I don't think anyone should be arrested for being a prostitute or for going to see a prostitute. I don't think it should be something you get arrested for, but it's one of those, it is a catch-22 situation. There are certain individual circumstances in which libertarianism in its more pure, unadulterated, ideological and idealistic form cannot cope. At that point, you must use pragmatism. My pragmatism tells me I'm not sure that it's a good idea to legalize prostitution in the manner prescribed. Decriminalization, yes. You shouldn't be jailing people for selling their bodies. There's a reason they're doing that. There's a lot of drugs involved. Drug treatment especially should be available to everyone. Instead of wasting taxpayer money on throwing Harold the Happy Hippie in jail, why don't we use that in cleaning up, a couple of heroin addicts? If we did that, we'd have a better state. It also costs less, by the way. You fiscal conservatives in Vermont should back such proposals. Fucking just end the drug war. Let the cops do something that's meaningful, like, bust down the door of a rapist. Or go after someone who's, like, shooting people. Why don't we focus on these people and leave, prostitutes and weed smokers alone? That being said, we don't need to set up a red light district in Rutland. I'm sure Burlington would have a lot of it, too, because of the UVM kids. You get some pasty incel from the West Coast pretending to be a hippie because all of a sudden he smokes weed. Daddy's trust fund will buy a lot of nights with hookers, and probably will. If he ends up with the clap, well, that's his own fault, I suppose. Is that people look the other way. It's an interesting scenario. So thank you for all of the many people who sent me that particular news story. I have quite a bit to say about it. That's about all. Peace out.